Hello everybody. In this video, I'll introduce you to Booleans and examine what they are and how we can use them in code. At the end of the video, I'll show you Booleans in action in some code, and watch out for the links right at the end of this video. What is a Boolean? A Boolean is a system of logical thought. This was developed by the English mathematician and computer pioneer George Boole. These are the operations we're going to cover. There's the AND, which is otherwise known as conjunction, and the little symbol in white next to it is another symbol for the AND. We're going to cover OR, which is disjunction, and again the white symbol, which looks like a V, is the symbol for OR. And we're going to use NOT, which is otherwise known as negate, and its symbol is that little white symbol next to the word negate. There is another OR, and this OR is an exclusive OR, sometimes known as XOR. I'm not going to cover this in this video, but it is good that you be aware that there is another OR. The difference between the two is that an OR means that either of the conditions need to be true, just one of them needs to be true, or both can be true. With the exclusive OR, only one of the conditions can be true. If they're both true, then it returns false. Let's look at these statements in a bit more detail here. So let's start with this AND. Now, if we have two variables, we say A and B. If we put these variables into a table, and now so this here is going to be AND, A and B. What we're going to do is we're going to set this this truth table up, and we're just going to use T and F. So T for true. If they're both true, we have A and B. Then both of the conditions are true. Both of the variables are true. So A and B evaluates to true. If A is false and B is true, then this is going to evaluate to false. If A is true and B is false, then that's going to be false, A and B, because A and B both need to be true. And if we have A and B are both false, then this is going to evaluate to false. So the only time that A and B, the only time that an AND Boolean is going to be true is if both are true. So if we move on to NOT, so if I make another column, another table, let's get rid of this. We have A and not A. So if A is true, then not A is going to be false. If A is false, then not A is going to be true. If we now look at this OR, and I do another table. We have A and B, and this is going to be A or B. So I'll put that in here, A or B. We draw out our truth table. If they're both true, A is true or B is true. Well, both are true, so this is going to return true. If A is false and B is true, well, B is true, so A or B has to be true, so that returns true. If A is true and B is false, well, A is true, so it's A or B, so that's going to return true. And if A is false and B is false, they're both false, neither of them are true, so it's going to return false. So the only time it returns false is if both are false. When we use the code, and can be written like this, not can be used like this, or can be used like this. But remember, this not can also be written like this. We can have combinations of these statements here, these statements here. We can have combinations of them. So what I mean is, let's say we have three variables. Let's say A equals true, B equals false, C equals true. So if we have A and B, or C, we can break this down by doing the parentheses first. So if it's in parentheses, do the parentheses first. A is true and B is false. Well, this is an and statement. So this whole thing here is going to evaluate to false because one of them is false. Now we have this bit here, so we can bring that bit down. Or C. Well, we know that C is true. So C is going to return true. Now what we have is a false and a true and an or. So since it's or, this whole thing is going to return true because this one is true. We can also have a look at let's make this an or, and we'll make C not C. So what's that going to evaluate to now? So if we have a look at it, A is true or B is true. So this is going to evaluate to true because A is true. Only one of them needs to be true. C is not true. So C is going to evaluate to false. So if this here was an and, this whole thing would evaluate to false. If this was or, then this whole thing would evaluate to true. So these parentheses here, they do matter. And it's, you've got to look at these first and then evaluate what that is. And then you've got to evaluate everything else. And they can get really complicated. You can have brackets within brackets within brackets. But for now, yes, let's just get used to doing some of these easier ones. So if we have not B and not C, this is, so I said and, didn't I? And not C or A. What's that going to come out as? So if we look at this, B is false, so that's going to be true. C is true, so that's going to be false. And because we have this and here, this whole thing is going to come out as false. And A happens to be true. So we end up with a false and a true. And since we have an or here, this will evaluate to true. Here we have our assignments. We have A is true. We don't need to declare that it's a Boolean because this is Python, so it's going to see it straight away. We just need to assign them to the variables here, A, B, and C. Here, this conditional statement, if we see this as a guard, and it's a guard to the code, and the guard is saying, if you have the right password, then I'm going to let you in and run this code. Otherwise, I'm not going to run the code and you can pass by. So let's look at the guard and see if we can predict what's going to happen. A is equal to true, and A is equal to true. We're using an and to connect them, so both of them have to be true before it will run. And B here must be equal to 4, and B is equal to 4, so this code should run. And it does, it runs the code. So what happens if we change this to not? This here is not. So, and not 4. So that's not going to run, right? Don't run the code. So can you see how this operation works? There is another way of doing this not. So if we do this and use the reserved word not, now we run it, it says don't run the code. because it's saying not equal to B. Well, B is 4. So 4, if 4 is equal to, if B is equal to 4, then it's not going to run. So if we change that, let's see what happens if we change that to 5. Now it runs the code because the conditions are true. So if I get rid of this and now change this to or, what do you think is going to happen? With this or, only one of them needs to be true, or both of them need to be true. So if they're both true, it's going to run, or if just one is true, it's going to run. So we've got A is true, that's true. And we've got B is equal to 5. Well, that's not true. Well, one of them is true, so it should run the code. And there it runs the code. So if we change this to 4, so both of them are true, again, the code should run. And it does run the code. So what if we have something a little bit more complicated? So if we put and C does not equal 5. Well, it does equal 5. So if we run that code, it runs the code. Now why does it do that? If we want C to equal 5. In this situation, we need to put parentheses around this statement here. So we're saying that this whole statement in the parentheses must evaluate to true, and this statement here must evaluate to true. So now if I run it, because we've got true and false, that should not run. And there, the code didn't run. Don't run code. So can you see how these fit together now? This whole statement ends up being just one true or false. And we can change this around. So both of these need to be true, or C is not equal to 5. So if we look at this code here, A is true, that's true. B is equal to 4, yes it is. So both of these are going, this is going to evaluate to true. This or C is not equal to 5. Well, it is equal to 5. That doesn't really matter now, because at least one of these conditions is true. So it's going to run. And the code runs. If we change this to and, excuse me, and C is not equal to 5, what do you think is going to happen now? So in these parentheses here, this evaluates to true, because both of these variables evaluate to true. But this one is going to evaluate to false now. Or it evaluates to false, but we need it to be true. So what's going to happen? We run the code, and it says don't run the code. So you can see how these Booleans can be very useful for setting out these conditions to an if statement, or even a while statement. You can use it in a while statement. It acts as a guard to make sure that the code runs under the right circumstances, or it doesn't run if the circumstances are not correct.
If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and try out one of my other videos.